Good morning, everyone. My name's Karen Lang. I'm on the CSTA Board of Directors, and I'd like to welcome you all to Teaching Standards-Based Accessible Web Design. I'd first like to remind you, if you haven't already, to turn off any Wi-Fi hotspots so that the internet continues to do well this morning. And I'd also like to introduce our two speakers, Terrill Thompson and Joe McAuliffe.
Thank you. I'm Terrill Thompson, and I'm with the University of Washington with a project called Access Computing. There are three logos up on the slide here. The one in the center is a project at the University of Washington funded by the National Science Foundation. It's a partnership between an organization called Do It, which stands for Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology. And that's part of UWIT. It's been funded by NSF and other sources since 1993 to work with kids with disabilities to sort of encourage them to pursue challenging careers. And we've done a lot of different things over the years working in that context. And then the partnership is with the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the UW. And the grant is to broaden participation of individuals with disabilities in computing careers. And so that's kind of our area of focus. And with that grant, we've worked on a web design curriculum that it's a full-blown curriculum. We've developed this in partnership with Squalicum High School in Bellingham, Washington. And Joe is here to representing Squalicum. He's going to be talking about kind of the nuts and bolts of the curriculum. But essentially, we've built a web design curriculum that integrates accessibility and diversity and just sort of respect for different populations within the curriculum. So that's kind of what we're going to be exploring. How many of you actually teach web design? Okay, so most hands go up. So how many of you are typical computer users? Okay, about most of the hands go up. What is a typical computer user? You answered yes, so you must know what that is. Anybody whose hand went up, how do you define a typical computer user? Somebody like you. Okay. Yes?
Well, I would argue that anyone who teaches web design by definition not
is okay. So anybody who teaches web design is not a typical computer user. That's probably true. Otherwise, there would be no teachers because everybody already knows it. So we've got kind of a silhouette here because there's some ambiguity there, but we've got probably what people typically think of when they think of somebody using a computer. They think of somebody sitting down with a monitor in front of them with their hands probably on a keyboard. And so this is kind of a typical model that you've got a box of some sort that contains information or communication or whatever sort of applications we're wanting people to use. And then you've got some means of interacting with that. So you've got input through a keyboard or maybe through a mouse, and you've got output through some sort of screen, right? So this is kind of a typical model. But this is pretty old-fashioned. Does this feel old-fashioned to you? Yeah? See some heads nodding? That might be partly because of the box. It's a pretty old box. But also, just this model is kind of dated. Anymore, maybe somebody is connecting using their iPhone and accessing applications and communicating and tapping into information and resources. Or maybe not an iPhone, maybe they're using an Android. Or maybe they're using a Windows smartphone. Or maybe they're not using a phone, maybe they're using a tablet. And again, you've got all the platforms. I couldn't squeeze them all into the screen here. But the landscape is getting more and more and more diverse. Maybe they're not even accessing anything visually. Maybe they're accessing content audibly, listening to information. You've got a lot more people doing that with smaller devices. And with laws that prevent us from looking at a screen while we're driving, we're needing applications that allow us to listen to content and interact audibly, receive output audibly. For forever, blind computer users have been using speech output, using screen readers to listen to content. And so we're now starting to sort of move into that space as well, those of us with eyesight. Maybe you're not providing input into the computer using a keyboard and a mouse. Maybe you're providing input using voice. Speech recognition, again, for a long time, it's been the domain of people with disabilities who maybe have mobility impairments or maybe other disabilities that prevent them from typing or writing, but they can use speech to dictate into the computer and to control the computer and operate its controls. Some people use a tactile interface. So again, people who are blind may be using Braille, both Braille output as well as Braille input, or either or. So I ran out of room. Otherwise, I could go on and on and on with different devices that people are using to connect to information and to access computers. So it's a much more complex, much more rich landscape than we might otherwise have thought. There is no typical computer user, bottom line. Even those of us who are accessing information visually have a lot of choices. This is a screenshot from my MacBook, all the possible resolutions that I can choose from, anything from 640 by 480 to 1680 by 1050. With most of those, I can choose to either use stretched or not stretched. And so whatever you see on your computer as you're developing something is going to probably look very different to me, and everybody's going to have a very different experience depending on what their resolution is. Also, I have a lot of choices in font size. This is from Firefox. I can go anywhere from 9-point to 72-point font. And obviously, whatever I'm looking at in that browser is going to look very different depending on what my resolution is. So this is all great because there's so much diversity out there, and we can use computers to access information and to communicate using whatever settings are right for us. So everybody's different. Each one of us in this room is different, has different needs, different preferences, and computers allow that to happen. So I like to think of ability on a continuum. When we talk about disability, sometimes we think, well, this person has a disability, this person does not. But that's very much an oversimplification. That we have people who are able to do something, depending on what that function is, perfectly able. Like, how many of you have 20/20 vision? Nobody? Wow, usually there's at least one. Probably some of you have better vision than others. Some people can't see at all, and most of us fall somewhere in between. Same thing with hearing. Some people can hear like a, what hears really well? An owl or a fox? Something that hears really well. Some people can't hear at all, and most of us fall somewhere in between. Same thing with the ability to walk. Some people can break world records sprinting. Some people have to rely on a wheelchair. Others fall somewhere in between. Ability to read print, write with pen or pencil, communicate verbally, tune out distraction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We could go on and on and on. And ability really is defined with each of these functions and on a scale. So there is no disabled, not disabled. It's just this mesh of people with different characteristics. And we all access computers, we all use technology, again, in very different ways, depending on where we fall and what the function is that we're trying to perform. So this is all great stuff for encouraging our students to think outside the box, to really think about who our users are. As we're learning to code, what is it exactly that we're building? And who is going to be using this, and what sort of characteristics do they have? So I think it's a great opportunity for us to think about diversity and to really respect the differences between everybody and apply that as we're developing, as we're learning new skills. So that's kind of what I say with this slide here. All this diversity provides an opportunity, and There is no technology without users. So it's important to keep those users in mind. Each user is different. So as we're learning to code, students should actively consider their users, including all these user differences that we're talking about. So the curriculum that we have developed does that, seeks to do that. That we, very early on in the curriculum, talk about accessibility standards and all of this diversity. We have lessons that expose kids to the diversity that we're talking about. And then throughout the curriculum, as students learn web design skills, including HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, they learn how to consider accessibility and to consider all the different possible users as they're working on those new topics. So I'm going to provide the URL at the end, so you can access that. But basically, the curriculum we've developed, first of all, it's free. I don't know if we have a bullet for that, but this is funded again by the National Science Foundation, so it's available for anybody to use. It teaches standards-based and accessible web design. It's platform and vendor neutral, so we focus on teaching concepts, not specific tools. So it's not a curriculum where you have to have Dreamweaver to be able to use it. And for the graphics unit, you don't have to have any particular graphics program. We're teaching concepts that can be applied using any tool. And there's a lot of coding that can be done with just any text editor and browser. Standards-based accessible design is taught early as a core design principle, and then it's reinforced throughout the course. And Joe, again, is going to talk in a bit about the course outline. And for assignments, students have to use valid code, and they have to conform to accessibility standards. So they actually are lessons that talk about what sort of tools to use in validating your code and checking for accessibility. So let me just give you a few examples. So you kind of have a specific idea of what we're talking about. From HTML, if you're going to add an image to a web page, you'd use the image tag, right? So you get the IMG element, and you've got a source attribute that points to the path and file name of the image, and then maybe you've got a width and height attribute to define the dimensions of the image. And so I've got an example here of the CSTA logo. Who's going to have difficulty accessing this image? Yep. Okay, so somebody's using an audible output mechanism or a tactile output mechanism, so screen reader or braille device. They're not going to know what this image has in it. And a screen reader will, if there's no other information, may read the path and file name. So /images/ and then however it would choose to pronounce CSTA logo.jpg, which would probably just be a jumbled mess. It's not going to be at all meaningful. For Nicole here, this is a student of mine from the past. She, since I worked with her, attended Stanford, got her degree in computer science, and now works for Google. And along the way, she had internships at Yahoo and Microsoft. Very, very smart girl. She's blind. She uses screen readers as well as braille output devices. But she would not be able to access this image on a web page unless we added alternate text. So just a very basic HTML principle that to make sure that graphic information is accessible to people that can't see it, you add alt equals and then a short description of whatever that image is trying to communicate. So an alt actually has been around since HTML 1.1. So if you're interested in incorporating a little bit of history into your lessons, that's kind of interesting. And that is built into our curriculum, that we look at the original HTML spec, which was scribbled onto a napkin by Tim Berners-Lee, legend has it. Typed up, it's got a lot of typos, and it's very sloppy as a spec. Whereas newer versions of HTML take years and years to write the spec and require hundreds of people contributing. But in the very first available version of HTML, there's an image tag and there is an alt attribute for people that couldn't see the image. And so that respect for diversity is built in. Second example, this actually came not from the curriculum, but from Gmail. And that is, we have a couple of images over there. Each one of those buttons, one pointing left, one pointing right, is an image. And so we get something like this. Image source equals left arrow, that ping. This does have alternate text. It says alt equals left arrow, alt equals right arrow. So, anybody going to have difficulty accessing that, you think? So we're kind of thinking outside the box, thinking very broadly about different users. When we think about accessibility, there is kind of a tendency for people to think about blindness, but there are lots of other people to consider as well. Again, diverse users. This is Wesley. He's a community college student, and he has no use of his arms, but he's got a good voice. So he is using Dragon Naturally Speaking, so it's speech input. He does all of his computing by voice. So operating controls, clicking buttons, and so forth, using speech. So in a case like this, he relies on, he can click links by just stating whatever the link text is. He can say, click home or click, whatever the link text is. In a case like this, he has to sort of guess what that button is what the alt text is going to be on that button, and that's what he needs to say in order to click that button. So probably left arrow and right arrow is not what he would choose to say. So think about the function of those images, and maybe alt equals previous and alt equals next would be a better choice. That's the kind of thing somebody would be likely to say, click next, and they would expect to be clicking on that button. So another example, as we move away from HTML and start looking at CSS, then adding CSS hover effects you can really help. You're probably all familiar with these. You hover over something and it changes in appearance. The CSS changes because you are hovering over that thing. In this case, the color turns to white and the background color turns to that, which is kind of an off purple. Let me just show you an example of this. So this is actually from the curriculum where students design their own web portfolio, and then they start, after they have the HTML structure, they start adding CSS to it to make it look better. And if we hover over links, then we get some change. The underline goes away in this case, and a star appears after it. If we hover over the menu links, then they change color, so the user can tell what they're hovering over. Who needs this feature, though, even more than mouse users? Somebody who can't use a mouse. If we can't use a mouse, like, for example, Jennifer, she has a mobility impairment that prevents her from using a mouse. She holds a stick in her hand and has enough dexterity that she can hit keys on this large IntelliKeys keyboard. So she's got an oversized keyboard, and she can hit the keys with her stick. And that's how she operates the computer. And typically with a website, she'll be hitting tab to move through the website, and then maybe arrow keys, enter, space, escape, other keys that make sense. If we go back over here and try to access this page with tab, I'm now pressing tab, and I have no idea where I am, because the code that we used just used the hover pseudo class. So we're only affecting, making changes to the content on mouse over, not on focus, which is what we need to do in order to make sure that this works for keyboard users. So as students learn how to do hover, they also do the same thing for focus. And they can very easily test to make sure it's working just by going in and using tab to control their website. So this is what it now works as I hit tab and I move through the document. All the same functionality that worked for mouse users now works for keyboard users. Okay, so one final example. This is using HTML5, and the curriculum is based on HTML5. We now have video, so we can introduce video and take this in all sorts of directions. If you want to integrate, multimedia into your class, then students can create video. They can learn how to add video very easily to the web. Just with the video tag, this alone would add video to a web page. So you got the video tag. You have the controls attribute if you want to have the browser's built-in media controller. Otherwise, you could build your own. And then you've got a source, which points to the video file. Anybody know who's going to be excluded via this tag? Is anybody using HTML5 video yet? There are actually some really interesting lessons to be learned with video. And that is, for example, if we try to play this video in Firefox, this is what we get. No video with supported format and MIME type found. This is because there are differences in browsers and browser support. So Firefox and Opera don't support MP4 as a media type. Other browsers do, but if you want this to work in Firefox and Opera, you're going to have to also add a second source. So we separate out the source now from the video element and put it in different attributes. And now we've got an MP4 file and the same file presented redundantly in a WebM format. Now Firefox can play it. So this is what we would get in Firefox. This is a video that we produced that features our own president at the University of Washington, Michael Young, talking about IT accessibility. So if this is the video as it's playing, he's talking right now, who's going to be missing out on this information? What do we need to do to make video accessible? What if you're in a noisy environment, sports bar, airport? Captions, you need captions. Okay, so this is a great opportunity to teach kids how to introduce captions. And in HTML5, all you have to do is add the track element. Just one element will add captions to this video, and it's actually very easy to create a caption file. And it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of kids working on this. There are free tools online that support it. So you can caption video, make that part of a lesson, and then add it just with this one tag. And now you have a very different video. This is what Internet Explorer 10 does with the caption video. It has a real nice interface, and you can see immediate results from your labor. You see the captions that appear down at the bottom. This benefits a lot of people, not just people with hearing impairments, but the captions are searchable. You can translate them on the fly into other languages. So lots of benefits to having captions on video, and students can learn all about that. So that's kind of an overview. I'll turn it over to Joe now, and he can tell you about sort of the nuts and bolts of how the curriculum is organized.
Thanks, Terry. Hello. As Terry already mentioned, I am a teacher from Washington State and up in the northwest corner of Washington State, Bellingham. And I got involved with Terry a number of years ago with this curriculum, and I want to give you a little view inside what the curriculum is like and show you the different units and how it's organized and give you a sense of what it is. My background is probably not as in-depth as many of you are. I know you're a lot of computer science teachers. I'm primarily an English teacher, and I taught web design for a number of years as one of the classes I teach in my schedule. And I've always relied on Terry's expertise, and I found it a very workable class, and I want to show you a little bit about what it's all about. It starts out with the first unit where we do some discussion and exploration of what makes a good page, because all kids have plenty of experience with the internet, but on a passive level, they view web pages and they get a general sense in their mind of what is a good web page, but we want them to be able to articulate that once they're done with this unit and really know what makes a good website before they start to develop their own. And one of the things that we do is to create this evaluation tool, a rubric for evaluating websites. And so there's a process that they go through. They start out first individually, and then they start to form groups and share ideas and begin discussion and get an active conversation about it. And then you come up with this product at the end of that unit where it has all of the traits. And then we get together and come up with a consensus for what makes a good website. And it's interesting, over the years, they usually come up with many of the same traits. And one thing that they quite often leave out is accessibility. So that kind of bridges us into looking at accessibility issues and talking about that. It's a great chance to introduce the standards at that point. I have, and some teachers who have used this program have used that rubric. Got to get that range right here, up this far back, I think, where they use that rubric at the end when students do their final culminating projects, and so they can start evaluating it. So they really own what it is to make a good website. They know how they're going to be judged, and they'll be ready for it. Okay. Second unit, they're usually very eager to get going with the coding, and get some hands-on work and start creating pages. And we work with the principle that first we're going to get the content down before we start to make the page look nice. And I think that really transfers to a lot of projects that students do, whether they're on PowerPoint or something else. They generally, their tendency is to want to make it look cool, right? Choose the colors and the themes and all that. But we teach that, first of all, it's important to get your structure and your content and get it organized. We use, I happen to use Notepad, but as Terry mentioned, it's vendor neutral, and so students can use other things in your classes, other programs, but in the teacher tips, we encourage you to use something that it's real simple so that they are working directly with the code. The first project that they make is a project that really stays with them through the duration of the course, and that's to make a portfolio. So they're making something purposeful at the beginning. It's, as I said, project-based, and they're making something that they're going to use to present their work to the teacher as they complete the work. So there's, it's not just on this particular unit you're making a product and then you go on to another one and there's no continuity. You're always going to work on your portfolio through the whole course and develop it as you go. Terry mentioned we work with HTML5, and at the end of each unit, there's a little reflection piece so that they have to put on their portfolio what it is that they learned during that session. Right. And then we have the styles that they'll learn CSS after the HTML, and they'll start to make the site look nice, and that's where they start to really get excited about adding the color, and there's a lot of lessons really about appropriate use of colors and when they're in this particular one, lost my train of thought, sorry. Okay. As Terry mentioned too, that with along with the CSS and the HTML, they're not learning it purely as standalone. They're also learning about how important it is to apply accessibility tricks and tips to make sure that they're making something that is very universal and people can read it with all kinds of platforms and who have different kinds of needs for experiencing the web. By the time they get to the fourth unit, here's where the kids like to work with images, and this we use. The instruction is all vendor neutral, so if you have Photoshop, which I happen to have, and I might slip every once in a while and say when your kids are using Photoshop, yours might not, there is all the instructions are written so that whatever kind of graphic program you have, you can still use it. And the product that the kids make gives them really a foundation, very introductory level of how to use graphic programs and how to make graphics and use them on your website. They'll create a little album which is, involves minimizing images and making those images links. They'll make some buttons which involves just layers and various things. And they make a favicon, and when they get to that unit, they start to learn some of the frustration with just how all the differences in all the browsers out there. My district, Internet Explorer is the default browser, and they try to see their favicon, it doesn't work. And so there's immediately a discussion about that, and we discover that some of the browsers will, work with this really well, and others won't. And and then they do a banner which has, kind of pulls together a lot of those different skills, and they create the banner for their portfolio. We get into a little bit of scripting, not too heavily, but they do some basic things like making the clock and showing a little alert thing, and they learn about debugging and just sort of the foundation, the basics. This is very much an introductory level class. And they'll be able to do scripting when they're done with it, and they'll have a sense for it, and they'll be able to find scripts and be able to use those and incorporate them on pages. And we want them to be really conscious about making a page that is standards-based, so they will do some validating of their HTML and CSS and the accessibility of their page. They also do some group work where they run some checks on their pages. They watch each other use the page and see what kinds of mistakes that the user the user makes as they go through the page. And so if they run into dead ends or they can't find whatever it is that they think they should, then they have to correct those, and they record, sort of do a little test of somebody else and see what kind of access the person has to the information. Then the way we've set it up, they won't be working with editors until the end of the whole class, in which case we introduce the editors, and it's done in a general way so that there's some commonality among editors. They can see some of the functions and the great tools that are there for them. And at that point, we also discuss hosting and publishing, because in the next unit, they'll have a client site that they put together, and they will, this is, it's a culminating project in that they're taking all of the lessons they've learned so far and make it something for a client. And see a lot of value in creating something for someone else. And so otherwise, what they'll do is put together the cool sites that they love with maybe the black background and the red flames, or wherever they can put them, or something like that. So we want them to get the sense that we're creating something for someone else. So we need to find out and employ some of those soft skills, find out what the user needs and what the client needs are, and pull it all together and make the communication that the client needs. So one of the, I didn't mention at the beginning, but one of the things I really appreciate about this curriculum is it's written so that students can work independently and go at their own pace. So I typically have, and I'm sure you have this experience in your classes, where there'll be a certain percentage of the kids that are accelerated. They move through it really quickly. And then there's going to be kids that they haven't had any background in this at all. They haven't made their own pages. And when I do surveys at the beginning of this semester, I find kids that haven't written any code. So I got to work at a different pace with those kids. And so they can work too through this really well. So you ended up allowing it, it makes it more individualized, and you can accommodate to what your students need more. One of the speakers that wasn't able to come with us on this trip, but he works in an ELL classroom, and he uses this curriculum. And he has for a few years, and he started working with us just this last year. And his name is Kyle Ringo. He teaches ELL to the kids in our building, and he incorporates the class with it. So there's a lot of English instruction along with the technology. And we've intentionally tried to make it so that there's some real deliberate language resources available for kids that need a little bit more support. So we'll have tooltips with vocabulary words that are a little bit more problematic, and kids can look those things up. And he's found that the individualized pace of it, with all the vocabulary background, and he can meet with all those kids a little bit more and work freed up. He's not doing whole instruction at all the time. You can, but he likes to be able to then get around and see what the kids need in their particular lesson that they're working on. And he has kids from many parts of the world. He helped us too with a lot. If you're familiar with ELL, there's the whole PSYOP pedagogy, and we try to incorporate that and to make it that much more universal. He worked in Mount Vernon prior to going to our school, and he felt really strongly that it was a great equalizer for kids. He had some kids that I was talking about, some Mexican-American kids that he had in his class, these girls that he really encouraged to get into the class and work on the curriculum that he had. And these girls, some of them, they ended up starting their little business, Las Chicas del Mount Vernon, which is where the community they're from. And they felt, it was pretty empowering. It was a great way to get on their own. And it's introductory level class. They started taking some more things after that, but he was pleased to see that they ran with it. Terry?
So as the slide says, it's not just a curriculum, it's a community. We have, there's an instructor's version that requires registration, and we have nearly 4,000 registered teachers worldwide and a discussion list with 372 subscribers. So the 4,000, it might just be people who are checking it out, so they sign up and they look and see what's going on. And then the discussion list, the 372 people are actively talking about how they use the curriculum and asking questions and supporting each other, helping either with coding problems where they're having trouble, helping students because they're running into some particular problems. That kind of thing comes up, as well as just sharing resources, sharing lessons, discussing teaching strategies, and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a nice add-on is having that community of people who are all supporting each other to teach the course. So the countries, this is worldwide. Lots of people are using it all over the world, and we just recently synthesized this data, and we're quite surprised actually that most of the users are in the United States. There are about 3,000 teachers registered in the United States, but there are also 76 in India, 73 in Canada, 52 in Australia, and quite a few in Philippines, Nigeria, Uganda, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. And then just teachers overall, virtually every country in the world is represented with at least one teacher. And so we like the fact that we're teaching, this respect for diversity is built in, and that message is going global, that anybody who looks at our curriculum is learning to code and developing some new skills that might help them and help their country, but they're also learning to appreciate and respect differences between people and how people access information and what they do with that information. So that's a really positive thing, I think. So just a couple of links here at the end then. The curriculum, it's at uw.edu/accesscomputing/webd2. And then these slides, if you wanted to access them, or any of the other slides that I've done over the years, I put all my presentations up there, mostly related to accessible technology. That's staff.washington.edu/TFT. So we have a few minutes left for questions for either of us.
It's more of a comment, but it wasn't necessarily accessibility. But when I saw the image tag up there, I always teach the kids that they never put a size there, because what I was told was that if you have one of those huge, big, highly pixelated photographs from a big camera, then when you put the size there, the same picture stays in storage, but it just reduces the size visually. And and that one should actually reduce the picture in Photoshop. So I just wondered about that comment because I refuse to let them do the sizing.
Yeah, it's true that the best bet, rather than don't use width and height to reduce the size of the image.
Not really reducing it at all.
Yeah, but the benefit of having it there is that it acts as a placeholder. So if somebody has a slow internet connection and the images aren't immediate, then the page is going to be in its actual shape with placeholders for the images that ultimately will fill those holes. Otherwise, you get one of those pages that starts with no images, and then as the images form, the page starts to transform, and it becomes kind of confusing. So width and height is good.
Was you mentioned Notepad, which I find very poor and very frustrating. And we did use TextPad. I forget the one we're using now, but it's free. But those ones color code the HTML first of all, so if the kid leaves out a quote, you can actually see. And secondly, you can have multiple pages open. So when you're doing CSS and HTML, you can easily click. Where in Notepad, it's a nightmare because you've got to open almost 20 copies and there's no color coding, and it takes forever to find any issues at all. So
Yeah, Notepad++ actually has the features that you're talking about. So it's like Notepad, but it's got it's built for web developers, and so it's got a lot. Yeah, the curriculum actually recommends, it has a list of different resources, both for text editors as well as for some of the other units like graphic programs and so forth. And there's a wide variety of tools that are listed, including, that have features like what you're talking about. So we want to keep it simple, so they're not overwhelmed with, like if you get into Dreamweaver, you've got, features galore, and you can very easily get away from just coding. We want people to just code. But, yeah. Yes?
I had two questions about validating. A while ago, I used to use a free scan called Bobby for accessibility issues. And is there anything still around? No longer available?
Yeah, Bobby no longer exists. That was purchased by a company called Watchfire, which was purchased by IBM, and IBM rolled it into something else that it sells for thousands of dollars. But there are other tools out there. One that a lot of people like to use is Wave. It's wave.webaim.org, or if you just search for Wave accessibility, then you'll find it. That's a nice tool that presents the page back to you, and with little icons over it showing where the accessibility problems are. There are several others too that are linked in the curriculum, but that's one that a lot of people like.
And my second question is there any way we can influence the producers of browsers to be more homogeneous?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, can we encourage the browser? Yeah, that's a tough one, and certainly there are lots of people who are trying to have that influence, and it's an age-old fight. But browsers are competitive, and these companies are all trying to get a leg up, and sometimes that means supporting things in different ways or doing things in different ways. With respect to video, it's actually an interesting. You can spend a lot of time exploring all the debates back and forth. Eventually, it looks like MP4 is going to be supported by Firefox and Opera. They were holdouts for good reasons, that MP4 is a proprietary format, and there's a lot of licensing fees that goes into supporting that. And Mozilla is all about open source, so they wanted to support open source video formats, and they were holding to that principle until Opera finally said, okay, well, we're not gonna, everybody else is doing MP4, we're gonna do MP4, and so now Mozilla's either the last holdout or they're gonna have to, make that change. But it looks like eventually we're gonna get down to one file format. So, but I think things are better, and CSS support is now a lot better across browsers than it used to be. So. Yeah. Yes.
How long is the first of the unit? How long your 8 units? Is that year-long class or semester? I guess.
You want to speak to that, Joe?
I do it as one semester. Can you use the podium, please?
Go ahead and step up to the mic here.
I think you have a lot of options. I do it as one semester, and I'll have typically about half the students in my class, which is a general ed class, make it to the end, and I'll have some that don't. So there's ways you could, I imagine, make it longer than that, a full year, if you do all of the supplemental things, because there's a lot of suggestions for things that you could do in additional, or also if you if you had them do all the supplemental readings and you added more supplementation, you could make it for a full year, I think. But I find for most students, 1 semester's worth.
Other questions? Yep.
I was curious to see that you didn't include validation as you went. That there was a separate unit after HTML, after CSS, et cetera, after images. Finally, you did validation. I don't think you want to do validation as you go.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't. Do we not address it at all early on? I think we.
It's the 4th or 5th unit.
Yeah.
They've learned HTML, at least based on the way the curriculum looks.
Yeah.
That you don't validate those first HTML pages, you don't validate those first CSS pages. It seems to me that you'd want to just incorporate that from day one, that, oh, your HTML file should be run through the validator.
Yeah.
Every time when you finish it, before you say
Yeah.
it's done, you look at it and validate it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me too, because, and I don't know, this is developed over the years, and I'm not sure what our decision process was for putting it where we did, but that it does seem that as you're learning HTML and things aren't quite working right, that a validator does come in super handy early on for figuring out what your problems are. So yeah, so it's a work in progress, and we're always open to suggestions, where it's iterative curriculum. So, yes?
Yeah, something else I do is I teach them a bit about what a good and bad website should look like. And I don't know if you know this one called Web Pages at SAP.com. It's been around. Right, so I chose 10 really bad websites and 10 really good websites. And I give them an analysis sheet before they do any designing whatsoever. I do what you do. They do the content and then they do the HTML. But they have to go and analyze those websites and look at what's good and bad about them. And I think that's quite a good way of getting them aware before they build.
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but that's part of that process at the beginning where kids go out and they have to find some sites, and I recommend we had websites that suck in the curriculum for a while, and somebody objected to it. They didn't think that was it back in there now?
No, it's in the teacher's version as a recommendation that you might consider this, but we did have some teachers who were offended by the site or by the name of the site. I'm not sure which,
But that's good. They learn from those negative examples, and they can really talk about those easily. That's a good point.
Any other questions? All right, well, it's about lunchtime, I think, so thanks.